Welcome to part 10 of our D2L video series. In this video, we're going to talk about using the D2L Assessments tool. The Assessments tool can be found right here on your D2L navbar. The Assessments tool is used to build tests, exams, or quizzes in your course. The Assessments tool is basically broken down into two areas. The Manage Quizzes area, where you'll actually build and create your assessments, and the Question Library, where you can build banks of questions that you'll use on your various assessments. To start, we're going to go ahead and go to the Question Library. This is where you're going to build question banks and questions inside of those folders that you can use on the various assessments that you build in D2L. You can see here that I have a Chapter 1 questions folder. You could do something similar to this where you'll build different folders that you'll be able to break your questions out into so that when you're ready to add them to your assessment, it's really easy to find what you're looking for. To build a folder of questions in the Question Library, you're going to come up to the drop-down menu here at the top that says Create New. Click on the drop-down menu and you're going to choose Section. A section is basically a folder in the Question Library. So when I click on Section, I'm going to click Create New, and it's going to open a window that looks like this. I simply need to give this a name because all I'm doing is creating a folder. So I'll call this Chapter 2 Questions, and I can click Save. You'll now see that I have a Chapter 2 Questions folder. You can also build folders within other folders. So if I wanted to, I could come into my Chapter 2 Questions and build subfolders inside of this folder. Maybe I want to create folders that break my questions down further by multiple choice, true, false, short answer, and so on. So now that we have a folder created, we can go ahead and start creating questions. There's a lot of different types of questions in D2L. In this video, we're only going to talk about a couple just for time's sake, but each one of these types of questions are covered in more detail in our handout. Certain types of questions can be automatically graded by D2L because you're going to specify what the correct answer is. That's going to be multiple choice questions, true-false questions, multi-select question, which is basically a type of multiple choice question where you'll have multiple answers and they have to pick 1, 2, or 3 answers in order to get the question correct. A long answer and a short answer question are both different types of an essay question that you would have to grade in D2L. A multi-short answer is also similar to an essay question where you would have to go in and grade that question. A fill-in-the-blanks question will allow you to specify multiple correct answers that the student could type in the blank, and that is what it would use to count that as correct. So, for example, if the correct answer was East Tennessee State University, the student could type that a lot of different ways. They might type ETSU, E period, T period, S period, U period, or other variations. So when you're designating the correct answers, you may want to think about some of those that you put in, because if the student types something different that you don't have, they would get it wrong. But D2L can grade that type of question for you. A matching question and an ordering question, because you're going to specify the correct matches in the correct order, D2L can grade those for you. The arithmetic and significant figures are two types of math questions. D2L does have an equation editor that you can use to build questions and students can also use to answer them. A Likert question is a survey type question. So this would be something that you'd use to create scales, agreeable, disagreeable scales, things like that. And the bottom two options are actually not gradable questions. These are just information blocks that you may want to put on your test. So a text information would be something that you may put in the middle of the test where you're going to set up a story or some type of scenario that the students need to read about, and then they're going to answer some questions about it. An image information is used when you need to insert an image somewhere in the test and then ask some questions about it that are going to follow. So you'll basically just build text information and image information questions in among your text if you need them. So to start, we're going to go ahead and just build a simple multiple choice question. So I would select it from the drop-down list and then click on Create New to actually build one. On the first screen here, you can see that anything that doesn't have a red asterisk is an optional field. So the title is something that I can put in optionally. If I'm going to have questions that have a similar text, I may want to put in a title in order to help me distinguish between them. Otherwise, you can skip this. The point is going to be the point value on your assessment. The difficulty is a value that you can assign to this question, so that if you're looking for a difficult one in your question library, it will help you find one quickly. The question text is your actual question, and when you click on this, you don't have to number your questions. You can simply just start typing and type in a question. You can use the full WYSIWYG editor, so you can do bolds, italics, tables, insert quick links, images, things like that. I'm going to go ahead and just type in something simple here. If I scroll down, you'll see that I can insert an image. You can insert an image using the WYSIWYG editor here, and if you do that, the image would be in among the text. If you use the image option here, it's actually going to break the image out separate, and you would have a line break and then the question. So it just depends on how you need it to be formatted. If we scroll down a little bit, we have some options. The enumeration will let you select what that is if you want to pick a particular type of enumeration for this question. The style is used if you want to use vertical styling for the answers, so you would have them laid out A, B, C, D. Horizontal would layer them side by side for the answers. You could use that if you, for example, wanted to have some images that students compare and then they pick the correct answer. And a drop-down menu is going to give them a little drop-down with the answers in it. I don't really recommend using that. You're much better off sticking with either vertical or horizontal. The randomize options checkbox would randomize all of the answers. So A, B, C, D would be randomized for each student. Now if we scroll down a little further, you'll see that we have a bunch of boxes that say value 1 through 4. These are your answers for this question. If I need to add more than 4, I can click this button right here, add option, to add a 5th answer. And if I need to get rid of one, I can click the trash can here to the side to actually remove one of these answers. So to insert answers, I would simply click in the box and type in my answer. And again, you can use the full WYSIWYG, so your answers could be an image, a link, a table, a lot of different things. So to define the correct answer, we'll use this weight column in the middle. Now notice this is a percentage, it's not a point. Your points for the question were defined up here at the top. So this is a percentage. To indicate the correct answer, I need to put 100% here, saying that if the student answers 4, they get 100% of the available points. This does allow you to assign partial credit, so if I were to type in 50 here, they would get 50% of the points. The feedback box on the side here is used as individual answer feedback. If they answer 4, I can give them some feedback after they submit their assessment. These are optional fields, and you only need to use them if you do want to give feedback for each answer. Down at the bottom, we're able to type in a question hint if we want to use one, and also overall question feedback. So this feedback would be given to the student regardless of whether they answered the question correctly or incorrectly. Again, these are optional fields, and you only need to use them if you need something there. Down at the bottom, I can click Save to build this question. Preview will let me see the question and make sure it looks the way that I want it to. Save and Copy is going to build this question and make an exact duplicate of it that I could then modify in some way. And Save and New is a shortcut key for you. This will save this question and open a new blank multiple choice question. If you know you have a bunch more of those to make, this can save you a couple of seconds instead of clicking back and hitting the button again. So I'm just going to click the Save button. See that it has built our question in the Chapter 2 Questions folder. I'm now going to go ahead and build one more question type just so you can see what the process looks like one more time. I'm going to click on the drop-down menu, choose a true or false question, and click Create New. Here again, I can select the points and difficulty if I need to, or I can just type in the question text. If I scroll down, you'll see I have all the same options that I had on multiple choice, but here my answers are already indicated for me. It's either true or it's false. So I'm going to indicate the correct answer by typing in 100%. I can then scroll to the bottom if I don't need these other fields and click Save. So as you can see, questions can be built very quickly so you know what fields you need to fill in. Okay, so now that we have some questions built in the question library, we're going to go ahead and return back to the assessments page. in order to actually build an assessment, and then we can add these questions to the assessment. In order to build a new assessment, you're going to click the New button here at the top. This is going to load the new assessment page. We're going to work through these various tabs. There are a lot of different settings that you can set on an assessment in D2L, so there's a lot of things that we'll have to go over here. Remember that anytime you see the red asterisk, that's a required field. Everything else is going to be optional. So I'm going to give my assessment a name. I'm going to call this Test 1. You can use categories if you want to break your assessments out into tests, quizzes, exams, things like that, so it sorts for the student. If you want to tie this assessment to the gradebook, and again, the gradebook is going to be covered in a later video, but if you have some grade items created, you can go ahead and select one. So I'm going to choose my Test 1 grade item so that this assessment is linked to my gradebook. When you do this, you are going to want to check the Auto Export to Grades option. What this is going to do is, once the student finishes taking their assessment and they make a certain grade on it, once the assessment is graded, it's going to plug that grade into the gradebook. Now, if you use certain types of questions, like essay questions, the attempt would not be set as graded upon completion, so you would have to go in and grade those, and then the grade would be plugged into the gradebook. Now down at the bottom there's a checkbox here that says automatic grade. If I select this, any of those questions that we talked about previously that D2L can grade, this will allow it to automatically grade those for you. Here you'll see is a checkbox to allow hints. Remember when we were building the questions, there was a hints box. If you were to type in hints there, this is where you would enable them to appear on the assessment. Here I can type in a notification email. This way I would get an email every time the student takes the test. Otherwise you would just want to log in and look. Now these two options here are two of our security settings in D2L. Disable right click is not going to allow the student to highlight everything on the test and then do a right click to copy. And disable pager access is not going to allow them to use the pager while they're taking the assessment, so they couldn't page other students the answers. If we scroll down, we're going to see 4 other optional fields. You can type in a description, an introduction for your assessment. You can also have a page header or page footer. Again, these are all optional fields. So if I scroll back to the top, I'm going to click Save Quiz to actually build it. And you can see here that it's been created successfully. And let's go ahead and move on to the Restrictions tab so we can talk about some of the other settings. On the Restrictions tab, at the top we have our availability dates. These work the same way as they do in other areas in D2L, except there is a new option here, Status. If your assessment is inactive, that basically means that students can't see it when they go to assessments. You will want to set this as active once you are ready for them to actually see the assessment out in D2L. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can take the assessment, because that's going to be controlled by the start date. If you have a start date set out a week or 2 away, they would simply see the name of the assessment listed here, but they wouldn't be able to begin taking it. So we can set a start date and an end date for our assessment, and also choose to display it in the calendar so the students will have that entry showing them when it starts and when it closes. A security option that we also have is to enable Respondus Lockdown Browser. If you turn this on, it's going to enable an option that the student will be required to be in Respondus Lockdown Browser to take their assessment. This is basically a browser similar to Internet Explorer or Firefox or Google Chrome or one of those, except it's specifically made for testing. It is going to lock the student's assessment down more than it would in a normal browser. They're not going to be able to run other programs, have chat programs running on their computer to record the screen and things like that. So you can choose if you want to turn this feature on or not. The next checkbox is going to require them to be in Respondus Lockdown Browser to view quiz feedback. So this would be what they see after they turn in their assessment. You can set up something called the submission view, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and they would be required to be in Lockdown Browser to see feedback after their assessment. So again, you can enable these if there's something that you want to use on your assessment. Here we have some optional advanced restrictions. You can type in a password if you're going to have a proctor, and you can use an IP restriction if you need to restrict the assessment to a specific IP range. Here we have the timing options. The way this will work is the student will have the specified time limit, and then they're going to have a grace period. After the grace period, the assessment is going to be flagged as being late. Well, what that actually means is dependent upon the next setting. If it's set to allow normal submission, which is the default setting, once the exam is flagged as late, it's actually not going to do anything to the student. They're going to be allowed to stay in there past the time limit. But when you go view the assessment after the students turned it in, you will see how late they turned it in. Now, if you don't want this to happen, you can come down and choose for it to auto-submit. What that's going to do is once the student runs out of time, it will auto-submit their attempt. You can also choose the enforced option, which is basically going to do the same thing as auto-submit attempt. It's going to enforce the time limit, and the student's attempt is going to be auto-submitted once they click the submit button. This will also enable a clock that will count down as the student runs out of time. Down at the bottom, we have some options for advanced availability. This is the way that you can allow a student to access the assessment outside of the normal availability dates. So here I have my assessment set to close on the 30th, but maybe I have a student that I need to allow access for a couple of extra days. I could click the Add Users to Special Access button, and this is going to give me a page where I can define a new date range. Maybe I want to give the student an extra day, or even a special time limit. And then I can choose the student from my listing here and click Add Special Access. And now that student is held to this date range, where other students in the class are held to this one. So that gives you a lot of flexibility in if you have a student that has some type of excuse or a doctor's note or some kind of reason that they need extra time, or maybe even a note from Disability Services that a student gets more time on the assessment. Next, we're going to move to the Attempts tab, and here you can set how many attempts the student is allowed to take on the assessment. The default setting is going to be 1, but you'll see that you can do 1 through 10 and even choose unlimited. And if you choose more than 1, you may want to choose which grade D2L is going to take. So here we have a few different options that you can choose from. Let's go ahead and move over to the Submission Views tab, and here we can set what the student sees after they submit their assessment. To change the default settings, you can click on Default View, and you'll see this is the message they'll receive when they submit their assessment. By default, they will only see their score. So if you need to change that, you can set it to show questions, and then it's going to ask you what questions do you want to show. The ones they got wrong, the ones they got right, with their answer, without their answer, and you can even select it to show the correct answers if you choose to. You can also come down to the bottom and tell it to show the class average and score distribution if you want to show these things after they submit the assessment. Once we're done, we'll come up and click Save View to set up this submission view for this assessment. Finally, let's move over to the Layout Questions tab, and this is actually where you're going to put your questions that you built earlier onto your assessment. So to do this, we're going to click the Add Edit Questions button, and it's going to load a page that looks very similar to the question library. I could start building my questions right here, or I can import them from the question library. Because we built some earlier, we're going to use the Import button. So I'm going to click Import. I'm going to choose the question library from my source collection list. I'm going to choose the folder, Chapter 2 Questions, from my source section. And now I can see the 2 questions that I built earlier. Here I can select them and click Save to add them to my assessment. Now if I had questions in other folders, I could simply repeat this process, clicking Import and choosing the folder to bring questions in from multiple folders in my question library. Now once I'm done and I have all the questions added to my assessment, I'll click the Back to Quiz Layout Questions button here at the top. Now because I didn't change the point value when I built my assessment, it did stick to the default 1 point. If I need to change this, I can click the Edit Values button to specify a new point value for these questions. I can also use the options over here in the left corner to set how many questions appear per page. If I type a 1 here and click Go, it's going to insert a page break every question. I could type in a 10 here and click Go, and it would put 10 questions per page. So this is a nice way that you can break your question up into pages, and I do recommend to not have more than 5 to 10 questions per page in order for the students to not run into any problems when they're taking their assessment. Now the next checkbox here determines whether the student can move backwards or forwards through the assessment. If you check this box, they will not be able to return to previous pages once they leave it. If you don't check the box, they would be able to move around freely within the assessment. Now that we have all these options set, I'm going to go up to the top and click Save Quiz just to make sure all my settings are saved. And let's go ahead and return back to the quiz list so that we can see what we've created. Okay, so let's talk about some of the options we see now on the main assessments page. Here I can see my Test 1. If I need to make any changes to the settings that I just made, I can click on Test 1 here to go back to the Edit page and make any changes that I need to. Again, once I'm finished, I can click on Save Quiz to save those options and then return back to the assessments page to see this top level again. On this page there are a few buttons here on the side. Let's go ahead and talk about those. This button here will allow you to preview your assessment. So I can click this and actually take my assessment, make sure it works the way that I want it to, make sure it's grading the way that I want it to before students do, so you don't run into any trouble. This button here is the statistics for test 1. Now after students have taken this, you're going to be able to go here and see a lot of information. You're going to be able to see the questions that students got right or wrong, score distributions, and a lot of other great information that you can see if your test is set up the way that you want it to be. This is the button that you use when you actually want to grade your assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and you'll see that it takes me to a page where there's a few different tabs. At the top I have a users tab. Once you have some students take your assessment, it's going to list their names down through here, and it's going to have their attempt underneath that assessment. I'm going to go ahead and log into another course that has some attempts in it so that you can see what this looks like. Okay, so now I'm in another course, and you can see here that I have an assessment called Money Quiz, and Charlie Brown has taken 2 attempts on this quiz, and you can see his grades here that he made. Now, if I want to actually go in and see Charlie's attempt, I can click here where it says Attempt 1, and that's going to take me into Charlie's attempt. I'm going to be able to see when he took the attempt, how long he spent. If I click on the quiz's event log, it's going to give me a breakdown of the time stamp for each page that he was on. I can even see the IP address that he was at when he took this assessment. Now if I scroll down, I'm going to see my questions and answers, and I can see the answer that he chose. If I need to change a score, I can simply type that in the box and then keep scrolling down. And for essay questions, you would use this to actually read the student's answer, and the score box would be blank. You would then type in the score, and when you scroll back up to the top, you can click the recalculate button to recalculate their final score. Now when I click save, it's actually going to publish that grade over to the gradebook if you have those 2 things linked. Now let me go ahead and go back to the attempts page so that I can show you one other thing. Sometimes a student's attempt will get stuck in progress, or maybe they run into some kind of problem and they just need you to reset the attempt. You can do that on this page as well. So if I wanted to reset one of these attempts, I could simply come in and check it here with the checkbox and click the trash can to delete the student's attempt. The student would now be able to go back in and take their attempt again. This has been a very quick overview of the D2L Assessments tool. There's a lot to this tool, and so it takes a bit of practice to get used to using it. I do recommend looking over our D2L Assessments handout as it goes into a lot of these things in a little more detail, and that may be beneficial to you when you're actually sitting down to create an assessment, just to keep that by your side and you can work through it as you're building your assessment. In our next video, we're going to talk about the D2L Grades tool. Thanks for watching.